Hello and welcome to the Savage Movie Night podcast. Today we are talking all about the movie Fitzcarraldo. I am your slowly alienating all those around me with my obsession with pop culture host, Adam. Joining me, as always, is my historically famous 19th century actress catching strays for no discernible reason co-host, Kristen. Hi, Kristen.
Hey, Adam.
And of course, our show isn't complete without our train conductor for a railroad to nowhere co-host, Rob. Hi, Rob.
Hey, Adam, Kristen, what's going on, guys?
Hey.
We're here. What is your history with Fitzcarraldo specifically and Werner Herzog more generally?
With this movie, I saw this when I was a kid, or I was dragged along. And I think I remember kind of being in and out of it, but something kind of like the memory of this film haunted me. And so I needed to check this out again. I'm really glad that we selected this film to review.
Haunted you. That's interesting. Yeah, it's a very interesting movie. So for me, I have zero history. I even looked up the rest of his filmography to be like, oh, have I seen anything? And no, this is the first one. This is my introduction.
So I had heard about this movie for a long time. As we'll talk about, its production is very famous or infamous, and it's talked about for many other reasons, just as a film itself. And Werner Herzog as a filmmaker is someone you hear about a lot, especially for modern audiences. They might know him best for his appearance in the first season of The Mandalorian. But he's also very famous as a filmmaker, both in feature and documentary work. And so this just coincidentally, before Rob had suggested this, had decided to make this his pick for the episode. Because if you guys haven't picked up, that's how we kind of decide what movies we're doing, is we all alternate choices. So, this was Rob's, and I had actually just coincidentally about 6 months before we're recording this, watched Fitzcarraldo on my own for the first time. And there's a documentary about the making of it that we'll talk about called Burden of Dreams that I'd also watched just after I watched the movie. And then I started watching some of Herzog's other movies just because I was kind of fascinated. And so, I then rewatched both Fitzcarraldo and Burden of Dreams for this, just to give myself a little refresher. And then I'd also ended up listening to a Herzog's autobiography, which is read by Werner Herzog, came onto Audible around the time we were getting ready for this episode as a deal it ended up being like $4.99 or something.
So perfect timing.
So I picked that up, and that was like 13 hours of listening to Werner Herzog talk about his life. That got me ready for this episode. So, it's just a lot of things coming together perfectly at the same time.
Was the audiobook narrated by him?
Yes. No, I said, cool. Yeah, I got a lot of him talking about his desolate childhood, which we will talk about later.
That's a long audiobook for him to narrate.
I don't know if I could do 13 hours of that.
That's a lot. But I always love it when it is the biography, when it's voiced by the actual person. Really adds a personal feel to it.
Yeah, it does. At times, the reason it could get tedious at times is because he will jump around a lot. Well, he'll be telling a story about his childhood, and then he'll jump and tell like a 13-minute anecdote about something from the 1970s. You could get lost at times, and I don't feel like I retained the information as well as I should have. It was still interesting. I'm glad I listened to it. And this fits perfectly with some of the stuff you will learn about him, especially his ideas of ecstatic truth that we'll talk about later. Even if I don't retain the facts about him, I retain the impression of him as a person. Excited to talk about him and the movie. So today we are going to learn when chainsawing off your own foot is medically recommended, why Catholic missionaries are encouraging a film production to employ prostitutes, and most importantly, why you should avoid dysentery, because we are talking all about Fitzcarraldo. But first, a word from our sponsors.
Today's episode is brought to you by Jazzology with Willard Jenkins. Jazzology is a fun and challenging jazz trivia show where two contestants go head-to-head for the chance to win $100 and prove their jazz knowledge. Watch along and see if you know the answers. Want to prove you are a true jazzologist by appearing as a contestant on the show? Use the link in the description of any episode to sign up. New episodes air every other Friday on Savage Content YouTube channel, youtube.com/Savage Content, and all past episodes are available under the Live tab. Thanks to Jazzology for sponsoring today's episode, and now, back to the show.
The story of Fitzcarraldo begins with the story of Carlos Fitzcarrald. Fitzcarrald was born in Peru in 1862 to an Irish-American father and a Peruvian mother. Fitzcarrald is the Peruvianization, Spanishification. What's the Peruvian version of Americanization or Anglicizing called? Anyway, the name was originally Fitzgerald, and the locals changed it to Fitzcarrald. By 1892, Carlos had established himself as a rubber baron, setting up a rubber station on the Moshigua River. However, the Moshigua was not great for transportation, even though it was close to the rubber itself. This led to Fitzgerald establishing a portage from the Moshigua to the Manu. A portage is a place boats and supplies can be carried between different rivers. In the case of small boats like canoes, they are carried in whole, but for larger boats, they are often disassembled, being carried and reassembled. Fitzcarrald had a 3-ton steamship dismantled and dragged up a mountain on an incline that exact size or steepness is not specified, and across an isthmus, later to be known as the Isthmus of Fitzcarrald. It took 600 men just to drag the hull across the isthmus, even with the help of log rolls underneath. The establishment of this portage made a previously inaccessible rubber region exploitable, and Fitzcarrald's efforts in doing so became legendary.
Interesting. So I didn't realize that it was based on an actual person. That's fascinating. Right, like that's what this is, right? Like a real person.
No,
Yeah.
We'll learn more about how this intersects with Herzog and his vision. It's at least inspired by a true story. Those Hollywood labels, like based on a true story, inspired by a true story, even the ones that are supposed to be, very historically accurate usually aren't very historically accurate. So,
yeah, it's a pretty compelling story within itself, but I mean, I think the movie takes it a little further.
Yeah, which we'll talk about. I know. So, Werner Herzog was born in 1942 in the middle of World War II Germany. His mother fled Munich when he was 2 weeks old with Herzog and his older brother after the house next to theirs was destroyed in an Allied bombing raid. They settled in the German Alps as the war ended and German reconstruction began. Because of the war and its aftermath, the region was very spartan, with no electricity, running water, or telephone. Herzog said that he had no toys or tools, and that as all the fathers were absent, and there was a sense of anarchy among the children. At some point in this minimalist childhood, a traveling projectionist came to the village, and Werner saw his first ever movie, sparking a lifelong obsession with the medium. At age 12, Herzog and his family moved back to Munich and took up residence in a small boarding house. It was during this time that he first met an actor by the name Klaus Kinski, who had a reputation for erratic behavior, having been fired from a renowned theater company in 1946 for his unpredictability. In 1950, he was committed to a psychiatric hospital after stalking his theatrical sponsor and attempting to kill her. During his stay, he was ultimately diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. One of the more interesting anecdotes was Herzog telling a tale of Klaus locking himself in the shared bathroom at the boarding house and come for 48 hours and destroying every bit of, porcelain in the room, so all the fixtures.
At what age? Because this really reminds me of like a teenager going through a whole lot of social skills issues.
He would have been at least in his 20s. He was born in 1925, something like. I'd have to look it up. So it's important to remember Klaus is old enough. He was technically a Nazi. Like, he served in World War II. He only saw a minimal amount of battle. So Klaus was born in 1926, October of 1926. But he saw actual small bit of combat. Not saying he was a Nazi in the sense that fit with his ideological beliefs. It doesn't seem to have. He did serve in the German military during World War II. So he, was on the side of the baddies. He is doing that because, again, it's not clear with dates. If Herzog was around 12, this is in the mid-1950s. So, Klaus would have been close to 30.
Yeah, it just sounds like what you've described, given what he went through as a child / teenager, is a whole lot of issues built up and anger and repressed feelings.
Well, so let me be clear. The person destroying the bathroom was Klaus Kinski. That was not Herzog. Herzog was a 12, 13-year-old witnessing a grown man throwing that kind of temper tantrum. And the grown man has a diagnosed psychiatric disorder that we are not sure if he ever really attempted to treat throughout his lifetime.
So interesting. You meet someone when you're 12, and then they act in one of your movies later.
Exactly. That was kind of why I was like, oh, they knew each other for that long.
Yeah, and it's actually not just one movie, right? I mean, he's been in a lot of her.
Correct.
Yeah.
We'll talk about their whole partnership. And, we'll also talk about the fact that one of the documentaries Herzog has made was a documentary about their whole relationship throughout the years. Nearly 20 years would pass. Despite his volatile personality, Kinski would go on to establish himself, not just as a working actor in international productions from European exploitation films like the spaghetti western classic For a Few Dollars More to major films like Dr. Zhivago, but also would become well-renowned within Germany as one of the country's great homegrown performers. Herzog went to school and began to make movies, but it would be 1972's Aguirre, The Wrath of God, that truly established him on the world stage and reunited him with Kinski. Aguirre would tell the tale of a group of doomed conquistadors traveling through the Peruvian jungles in search of the mythical El Dorado, the city of gold. The shoot was arduous, with most of it taking place in remote sections of Peru like the rainforest, Machu Picchu, and on some tributaries of the Amazon known as the Ucayali region. Remember the Ucayali region for later. There will be a test.
Wow, that really explains the familiarity of the area and maybe some of the culture as well. And I think also the colonistic kind of world that some of these stories come from.
I think European exploitation is a good descriptor for, I haven't seen these other films, but even the current film we're discussing today, I think exploitation is the perfect word to describe this whole movie.
I've now watched all the collaborations between Herzog and Kinski. For me, Fitzcarraldo and Aguirre are probably the best, as slight spoilers. But all are considered very good, and they all have their things about them. With Herzog's movies, there is commentary on colonialization and exploitation, but at the same time, you can also see him maybe possibly, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, doing the same thing. So it's very interesting.
You mean becoming what it is that he's criticizing?
Yeah. In some ways. And, also while you can read criticism in it, I'm sure there are others who don't think the criticism is there, or if it's there, it's not strong enough for how awful the things he's depicting really was. In addition to the harsh remote locations, the other problem was Kinski. Kinski was already prone to violent, grandiose outbursts, as we've already talked about. And this was seen further on the shoot. At one point, Kinski became upset by the noise of some cast and crew members playing cards. In their off time, cameras are not rolling. This is not a Christian Bale meltdown on the set of that Terminator movie, where the guy is crossing in a sight line in the middle of a take. This is their off time. Kinski fired 3 shots at the shack where the game was taking place, removing the top joint of an extra's finger. However, rather than work to try and calm Kinski or otherwise control him and his erratic behavior, Herzog would actively encourage it, deliberately inciting the actor into rages. This was done because the two had a difference of opinion as to how the character of Aguirre should be approached. Kinski wanted to portray him as a maniacal, cackling, and over-the-top, much like Kinski himself, whereas Herzog wanted quiet menace. Some might say like Herzog himself. I wouldn't, but some might. Herzog, in order to get the quiet performance out of his high-energy, over-the-top star, Herzog would provoke Kinski into a frothing rage, allowing him to rant and rave until he finally came crashing back down to earth, the energy spent. Herzog would then roll cameras and get the take he wanted. This toxic environment came to a head when, late in the production, Klaus decided he had had enough and was leaving. Werner knew his film would be ruined if that happened, so he grabbed a rifle and told Kinski that if he boarded the boat, he would be dead before he reached the bend and got out of sight. Today, Herzog says that he was bluffing, but Kinski, at least then, believed him and stayed.
So they're definitely both characters, but Kinski, like,
who gave this man a gun?
I know, right?
Give him a prop gun, for God's sake.
He is fascinating to watch, though. Like, there's something really, like, you see people melting down, go crazy all the time, and have this look of just madness. He does it really well. Like, there's sometimes you see actors and you're like, I think he's a little bit that character in real life. That's Kinski.
Yeah. Kind of like how Jack Nicholson is kind of like a lot of himself and a lot of his characters.
Yeah.
Well, that was part of why after watching Fitzcarraldo, I immediately, like, Aguirre was the first one I watched after that. Like, I wanted to see more of this collaboration. I wanted to see more of Kinski because he is this interesting, magnetic person, and we'll talk about, why that may be, or, whether he's magnetic for positive or negative reasons as we go. But, Kristen, to your point, who gave this man a gun? You could say that about both of them, because both are wielding guns in this story. And, Herzog is, obviously much calmer. And, as he recounts the story, it is very much, like, oh, I had no other choice. If he left, the movie would be ruined. We would be no more financing. We wouldn't be able to finish. So I did what I had to do. I was never going to shoot him, of course, but I had to make him believe I would. But one problem with all the stories we hear is they're almost all from Kinski, from Herzog himself. A lot of the is told through Herzog's lens. Even when it's other people telling it, it's either telling it to Herzog in a Herzog documentary or, related through Herzog in some way. So, that's the other thing to think about is there's a lot of Herzog's own filter on, how he portrays himself in this relationship and, as, always being the one in the right.
That should translate pretty quickly to, yeah, he's nuts.
Well, I think, obviously Kinski himself had, diagnosed mental issues, which will unfortunately have, even more consequences as we get into the aftermath in part 2. But Herzog himself he likes to portray himself as just a regular, normal guy, like in his autobiography, and he's talking a lot. But then, he definitely has, whether it's drive or vision or however you want to character, there are some things that just make him tick a little bit different. Some people who like to do impressions of Werner Herzog, similar to what I'm doing throughout this episode, because it's fun. But like, it's also easy to exaggerate and not be far off the truth of, like, when you hear him talking about like his childhood and especially his childhood, but it's just his life in general, and his relationship to hardship, and so be like, yes, all the kids in my village, we were taught in a single school room, in a single schoolhouse, run by wolves. The wolves would take us out and we would run with the pack every day, and we would take down the slowest, smallest child who couldn't keep up. And,
I could see
like,
that, yes.
And it was beautiful.
Just a normal upbringing.
That's an exaggeration, but at times it doesn't feel like that much of an exaggeration. So Herzog himself is a very interesting guy. There's another factor there, which is also just the remoteness and the harshness of the conditions of the shoot. And keep that in mind as we move into some of these next sections, because in spite, or possibly because of the tensions on set, Aguirre, Wrath of God, became an international hit and eventually a classic. Roger Ebert included it in his list of 10 best films of all time in 2002. Wow. And it was included on a 2014 list of 39 essential foreign films for a young filmmaker by Martin Scorsese. Despite all the conflict, Kinski and Herzog will collaborate again on 2 more films, both in 1979, Nosferatu the Vampire and Vyshek. They were filmed almost back-to-back. Even more shocking than their agreement to ever work together again is the fact that it seems like both shoots went mostly free of the extreme drama that accompanied Aguirre. However, despite the peace on the 2 sets, and despite the critical success of both films, the 2 had no plans to work together again, as Herzog began to work on his next project and once again set his sights on the Ucayali region of Peru. See, I told you there'd be a test, and you needed to remember it.
It's not going to be the last time either.
Ukulele, night and day. It's
not
going to get a copyright strike. The project that would become Fitzcarraldo started with standing stones. A standing stone is, according to Wikipedia, a large upright stone and placed in the ground by humans, typically dating from the European Middle Bronze Age. They can be found as monoliths or as part of similar stones. Their size can vary considerably, but they often taper toward the top. The purpose is debated, and there are people who think the standing stones are the work of alien visitors, as primitive Europeans in that time period could not possibly have had the technology to move and erect these stones, regardless of their purpose. Werner Herzog thinks these people are idiots and became obsessed with ancient engineering techniques like rolling logs, ramps, and pulley systems. Meanwhile, Herzog also heard the story of Carlos Fitzcarrald. At the time, he didn't really care, thinking to himself it was just the story of another capitalist exploiter, which is fair. But then, as he was leaving, the friend who had started telling him about Fitzcarrald said, "Oh," and he dragged a 3-ton steamship over a mountain. Suddenly, Herzog's imagination was hooked, and it quickly began combining the ancient techniques of moving large objects and the steamship in the jungle.
And there was the birth of Fitzcarraldo.
Yep.
It's an interesting idea, that's for sure. I've never seen anything like it.
I mean, that's the thing. It's based off. I mean, it actually happened just slightly differently, very slightly differently. But it's a really kind of compelling story when you think of all the factors, the time period, technology, all of it. I think it's part of why what gets captured in the film sort of works. I know we'll get into it. I'm trying not to
Yeah. Well, and that was one of the challenges of writing this script, of how do you talk about it without giving too many spoilers, because so much of the production in some ways ends up feeling like it's talking about the plot,
right.
that this is a movie where reality and fiction merge together very much.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something we will continue to talk about. The remoteness of the first shoot, you wonder how much that is a factor. Like, Kinski obviously had his issues. In 1950, he was stalking and threatening to kill a sponsor, someone who was helping his career, and that was in, Germany. But Nosferatu and Wycheck, they seemed to go smoothly. And then we'll talk even about how, Kinski ends up in Fitzcarraldo and how that goes. But, I don't think the remoteness and harshness of the conditions helped him and his disposition.
Yeah. No, I'm super interested in watching the documentary of the movie too, because there's so many questions and so many things I would imagine.
Herzog envisioned a man driven mad by obsession, pulling a fully intact, massive steamship up a steep incline. There was interest from major Hollywood studios that wanted to do most of the film using special effects while shooting in safe locations like Hollywood. However, to properly capture this vision, Werner was insistent that he needed to film an actual, fully intact, massive steamship going up a steep incline. No special effects, no scale models, actual boat over actual incline in an actual jungle. Herzog chose to finance the movie himself and film in Peru. Top Hollywood talent was interested in the part, and eventually veteran actor Jason Robards was selected for the lead role. Robards was known for roles in films like All the President's Men, Once Upon a Time in the West, Johnny Got His Gun, and Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Playing the role of his sidekick, described as a simpleton actor, was Mick Jagger, lead singer of the Rolling Stones. Filming began in February of 1981 in Iquitos, Peru. Herzog wanted to get the easy filming out of the way before moving 1,500 miles into the jungle. The production ticked along nicely with Robards and Jagger working well together. They shot for about 5 weeks and had completed around 40% of the movie when Robards, who was 58 at the time, caught a crippling bout of dysentery. The illness was so bad that Robards was evacuated back to New York City, and once he recovered, his doctors forbade him from returning. With his star gone, Herzog now had to find a new lead and additional financing so they could essentially start over. In the meantime, Mick Jagger had a tour with the Rolling Stones scheduled to start and also had to drop out. Herzog, already searching for one new actor, simply chose to eliminate the role from the script. At one point, just to keep the film going, Werner considered playing the role himself. But eventually, Herzog settled on a replacement, the man who would save the picture, Klaus Kinski.
So I think for those who don't know what Klaus Kinski looks like, it's important to understand he's a character, and he's got, like, right away in the film, without getting to the plot or anything, you see him, because the way he kind of enters, a bit disheveled, and he's got, like, the master of the bedhead. Like, he's got wild looking hair, and his eyes are big and wide, and he's just got that crazy look. It's kind of like, I don't want to say crazy, but just intense, very intense.
When I first saw him, he thought he kind of reminded me of Brad Dourif a little bit, not completely, but similar structure.
I can see it. Yeah, no, but Rob is right. Just like brimming with intensity. Even in the scenes when he is calm, he just has this energy and intensity running through him, which is again part of what I was talking about, where it's like I've got to see more. Like, is it just this one performance, or is this a constant thing with him? You know, Kinski has this interesting look. He's very interesting in the part. Very little survives of the 40% that Robards and Jagger shot together. That most of it is in Broken Dreams. That Herzog, in fact, when doing his own documentary about him and Kinski, had to get the footage from Broken Dreams of Robards because that was the only place he knew about it anymore. But those like little glimpses you get, it's a fascinating, interesting contrast that really make you wish you could see that movie because talking about again, without talking too much about Kinski's performance or the movie itself, Robards has a very different portrayal of it that is equally compelling. And Mick Jagger was interesting in it. And I think we can talk more about the contrasts as we get to the scenes that you can see to compare and contrast. But
yeah, I have some ideas and some questions, but I'll hold on that as we continue because I can see where it might go.
Yeah. Well, and Rob, do you know Jason Robards?
I don't recognize the name. I'm sure I should.
He'd been married to Lauren Bacall after Humphrey Bogart. Kind of got a gravelly, raspy voice. He's probably one of those guys you'd recognize him.
I do. I just looked him up right now as we're talking. I'm like, oh yeah, no. Yeah.
Well, I knew him. For Once Upon a Time in the West is a movie I've loved for a long time because I like Sergio Leone. Which that's a fun connection between him and Kinski.
Exactly.
Would have been interesting to see that version. Credit to Herzog for being able to scramble and Kinski to come in and save the picture. So we'll see. Bold move, Cotton. We'll see if that pays off.
Side question here: was Mick Jagger already doing his film career?
Mick Jagger doesn't have much of a film career. He did 1970. He did Ned Kelly about the famous Australian outlaw. He did another couple movies around that time. This would have only been his third or fourth movie, and after this, especially that's an actual acting role, not essentially playing himself or playing a cameo or sometimes just a walk-on role. That this, Ned Kelly, there's, like I said, there's maybe one or two others than this. Then there really isn't that much after this. And then you have, he's in the 1992, I think it is, movie Free Jack. Mm-hmm. Yeah, with Emilio Estevez and Anthony Hopkins and Rene Russo and also David Johansen from the New York Dolls.
Yeah, no, I wasn't sure if this time period was one that coincided with a run of movies he made. It doesn't sound like
no,
it was pretty spotty.
It sounds like he was always someone who was flirting with getting into acting, but never really pulled the trigger in a serious way. So. The reshoots of the material in Iquitos went smoothly, and soon they were ready to move into the jungle and try and take a 300-ton steamship up a 40-degree incline. They hired extensively from indigenous tribes, with some coming from hundreds of miles away. They were there to act as extras and labor, with many of them making $3.50 a day, a rate Herzog says was more than they could earn elsewhere at the time. A camp was established with natives. Though mostly males, some did bring their wives and children. and the rest of the cast and crew made up of mostly Europeans. The camp was segregated, with a section for the natives and a section for the rest. Herzog said this was because he did not want to contaminate the natives with Western thoughts and practices, and that the natives would not care for European food and vice versa. Because of the large number of men, both native and European, so isolated, it was recommended by a Dominican missionary in the area that Herzog bring in several prostitutes to be part of the camp to prevent the men from raping native women in neighboring villages and causing an incident. The challenge before them was immense. While the real Fitzcarrald had taken a 3-ton, mostly disassembled ship over a slight incline, and even then, Herzog would insist the ship was 30 tons, in keeping with his own admitted disinterest in facts over what he calls the ecstatic truth, or the emotional truth of something or someone. Werner was determined to go bigger in every way. 3 ships were employed to patrol the boat. This was so they could keep working on making progress, pulling the boat up the incline. They could also be out shooting the other boats in the river. Despite Herzog's insistence on realism, he was not opposed to using modern equipment and techniques to achieve what he was looking for. He employed a team of engineers to help create a plan to get the boat up the incline. However, their plan was for an only 20-degree incline, and after Herzog refused to lower his ambition, the engineers departed from the film. A bulldozer was employed to help clear trees and lower the amount of the incline and to assist the human labor pulling the boat from behind the scenes. The problem was the bulldozer would break down, leading to lots of downtime waiting for it to be fixed. Similar delays also occurred thanks to Werner's demands, such as certain scenes could only be filmed during golden hour. Overall, Herzog himself admitted that much of the film could have been made in Iquitos, but felt the isolation would bring out something special.
All right, lots to unpack in that section, huh? Lots
Yeah,
to
there
unpack.
is.
First off, I Googled what minimum wage was in 1982 for reference. It's $3.35 an hour for people, minimum wage, and he's paying $3.50 a day. So just to give an idea of that, that's an interesting
Was that
thing
the
to
rate in
discover.
Peru?
No, that was the rate.
Yeah, that's just here in the U.S. But I'm still saying, like, just to give you an idea of, like, I guess money back then. That seems interesting. I don't know if it's necessarily off, but sounds a little exploitative to me.
Yeah. No, and there were people making that case at that time that Herzog was exploiting the native people. Herzog would disagree with you. I'm not trying, especially in how I am portraying this, I'm not trying to necessarily take one side or the other. I can definitely see it both ways. I was trying to, present, do my best to be objective, present both sides, and let people draw their own conclusions on how they feel about it.
Yeah, I think it's easy to, not easy, but you're tempted to immediately pounce on that. But at the same time, I'm in LA, and I just know that even now, I mean, the studios just want to pay at least the amount as possible. So that's just a thing that's always been around, right? There's a lot of sides to it, but yeah, more than likely, I mean, they were fleeced.
Yeah, but there's no studio here. From his point of view, this is a better daily rate than they would get doing any other job, and so that's what makes it fair.
That actually might be partially true. Just like when
it might be true, that still might not make it right.
Right. And just like the separation of natives and the Europeans on the set. At first, I think it's all about the manner, because when you first said it, like, that sounds crazy. But I actually kind of understand some of that, because one of the strongest, we'll get into it, but there's the authenticity of the Indians, of the natives, is very real, and I think creates filmography and scenes that you wouldn't otherwise get.
Again, you can kind of see it both ways, where his idea that he doesn't want to contaminate the native. He's working with too much with Western culture and Western, not Western, but their culture and ideas, because he's already, in regions with more contact with the outside world. He's already seen a lot of that where, while these people still live in, and again, this is like 1981, these people are still living in tribes and have a lot of their ancestral ways. They're also, wearing Mickey Mouse shirts, and so, I think in his mind, he's doing his best to try and prevent that pollution. When he talks about contamination and pollution, that's what he means. But even then, and keeping in mind that he is saying this in English in the documentary, and English is not his first language, that wording immediately jumps out at you. And that's where you're just like, I don't know how I feel about this.
Well, I think that I'm sorry, Christian, one thing real quick is that one of the strengths, and I think I can say this now, of the film is its ability to really show the tension and the, I'll just get right into it. One of the really effective things in this movie is how the stares. The natives, how they stare at the Europeans and those who are well off. They don't show facial expressions, but they're just watching and observing, and it gets you thinking about what are they thinking about, and what are they possibly plotting, or I don't know about plotting, but it just gets your mind going, and you also see this a little bit of this tension, and then at times you even see some locals that are a little bit more well off. But how they have adopted, how they've transitioned into that role is kind of interesting as well. Still holding on to their old ways, but kind of, you could tell, at a place where they're communicating with the Europeans.
Yeah.
I think the intention is there of like, oh, I don't want to, I guess, even though he says contaminate, which is not a great word for this, but, I get the intention, but it also could be construed as like, keeping things separated when there is an opportunity to come together and learn from each other. Yeah. But I can see where he's coming from, at least in that way.
You can see it from angles that could be beneficial to him. You could also see it from angles that could be negative, and it's hard to know really how to feel about any of it.
However, there is one way that I absolutely do not feel. I have a very distinct way. There's no nuance to it. I don't think there is a reason to bring prostitutes to prevent the men from raping Native women. How about you just don't rape women? How about we just have some kind of standard here? Like, God, terrible, absolutely terrible.
Yeah,
I can't believe it. I can't believe it, unfortunately, but I don't like it.
On the one hand, my stance is sex work is, real work. We shouldn't shame sex workers if that's what they want to do, so long as they're not being exploited, fine. But, on, the other hand, yeah, I completely agree with your point that, you should not be employing them as a rape prevention, that men should, especially as this isn't like years and years of isolation. This is, the plan was for 3 months,
Yeah. And like, listen, what you were saying about sex work is totally valid and all of that, but that's not even the point. The point is the fact that there are these people, part of the production, that suddenly can't control themselves and be regular human beings. Just abhorrent. I hate it.
I included it not just because they did it, but because it also shows, and again, this is just barely 40 years ago, a little over 40 years ago, that a Catholic missionary recommended they do that, and, so that was part of the culture, that was part of the thinking at the time, and, I've heard of movies like the Blues Brothers actually having a cocaine budget in the movie. This might be one of the first that officially had a prostitute budget. Officially. I'm sure there are others that did, just unofficially.
Well, that's going to make the Sunday collections that much easier for the... Oh, never mind. It's a whole other subject.
Well, we still have quite a bit to go through, and we haven't even gotten to the plot yet. So let's keep moving. But the isolation would become a burden as filming dragged on and progress slowed to a crawl. Tensions rose within the camp. A knife fight among some of the indigenous women nearly broke out, as captured in the documentary. 3 people were shot with arrows, one man in the throat, all requiring emergency surgery. The attack was from a largely uncontacted tribe that had been driven out of their normal territory by drought and saw the large camp as a threat. A man working on clearing trees from the path of the boat was bitten by a venomous snake. The man knew that anti-venom was far too far away, and so he used his chainsaw and cut off his foot just above the ankle to stop the spread.
Wow.
He lived. There was also 2 plane crashes involving the shoot, with several left injured and 1 person was paralyzed. The shoot, that had been scheduled to last 3 months, stretched longer and longer, with medical supplies, sanitation supplies, and food running low. Morale was also hampered when the only soccer ball developed a hole. The cast and crew's stir craze is summed up by this from Kinski. You can't go anywhere. You can't go. You can't escape this fucking stinking camp because you never know when they're going to call you, because you have to be here because you're paid for it. You're under contract, so you can't just go. It means you're completely captured here. Completely. This begins to explain Kinski's mindset, as he would rant and rave between takes, demanding Herzog fire certain people who had displeased him in the moment. While Klaus had been fairly well behaved before filming moved to the jungle, his rages became a part of daily life. His volatile, explosive nature caused tension with the natives, who valued gentleness, peace, quiet, and calm. This eventually led, according to Herzog, one of the chiefs approaching Werner and asking if they could kill Kinski for him. Herzog declined, telling the chief, "I need him to complete my movie." Finally, after more than 6 months of grueling filming, the shooting wrapped in November of 1981.
I mean, is all this stress really worth it? I mean, I'm thinking of the entire film, and I'm like, come on, guys, it's not that. Like, just to have that kind of chaos and just uncomfortability. It happens with so many films. It's another Texas Chainsaw Massacre is another one like that, where it's just the people just go through hell to make this movie, and I'm like, man, it just doesn't seem worth it. That's crazy.
The thing is, though, is that pretty quickly, you're in a whole other world. I mean, the things that you see in this film immediately, you're far from, society, and you're deep in the Amazon, and that's another big, powerful aspect of this film.
We'll talk about it as we go through the film, but one thing you can say for this movie is it is gorgeous. It is a very beautiful movie to look at, very well shot. But that is something, especially as you're watching Burden of Dreams, even Herzog himself, he said people are questioning why he is making it so hard. Like, dude, you don't have to make it this hard. And he even kind of says he thinks making it harder will result in a better film. The isolation, the wondering if they're going to make it, be able to complete the film started to wear on him. And he had some interesting quotes that I think are illuminating. I read you some guys offline, some of the more fun quotes about the jungle and stuff. But I think I'll just read this one that I think does kind of sum up his thinking. If I abandoned this project, I would be a man without dreams. And I don't want to live like that. I live my life, or I end my life with this project.
There's so many artists that are like that, man. They're just so intense about it. And sometimes it does make good stuff. And other times I'm like, come on, like let's take it down like 3 more notches here. Like I get, you know, having the vision and wanting to stick to the vision, but a lot of people get hurt along the way when somebody is so gung-ho about it being their way or no way. And obviously, I mean, there are some good, I'm sure maybe some people had good experiences from this, but when you have natives wanting to kill one of your lead actors, I feel like you've taken it a little far. Like, I don't know.
I don't know. Well, I mean, like I tried to, you know, despite him being an actual literal for the Nazis and other stuff we'll learn about him, I did try and give Klaus Kinski the most favorable light we could to show, again, both sides, that, you know, here is Herzog's side of Kinski was just completely unreasonable, and try and show maybe why Kinski had some, even if he was unreasonable himself, had some legitimate reason to be upset with Herzog himself. You know, but we will see if Herzog, by the end of this, by the end of part 2, is the only person who ever wanted to kill Klaus Kinski. You know, it may be a theme. And, you know, it's that old saying, you know, if you see a jerk in the morning, wow, you ran into a jerk. If you see a jerk in the afternoon, wow, you run into another jerk. That's bad. But, you know, keep running into jerks all day, you might need to take a look in the mirror because you might be the jerk. What do you guys think of cutting off your foot with a chainsaw? Think you guys could do that?
I mean, you wouldn't catch me doing it, but I respect him, man. I respect it because he was smart. He was like, listen, I'm not going to die for this. I'm just going to cut off my foot, and like, go for him.
Did he do it himself, or did someone do it for him?
He did it himself. Like, he didn't have time for someone
Honestly,
else.
that's pretty metal.
That's crazy.
Oh, and that it worked. I mean, like,
Did they film that? They should have filmed it.
no, I don't
That
think
should have gone in the movie.
No, I do not believe cameras were rolling at the time.
I'll do anything to get this boat over the hill. I'll even cut off my own foot.
What an opportunity that was. Missed.
So, all right. The final budget at completion, based on what I could find, was 14 million Deutschmarks. Converting that in from Deutschmarks into dollars based on the rate in 1982, and then converting all that using an inflation calculator into today's money, I could have really screwed this up, but as best I can figure out is a little over $100 million American in 2024.
No way. That is insane.
In 2024. You know?
Well, it's funny because when you look at some of the things they did in this film, you almost really believe that too. I mean, you know, this was not cheap. I mean,
yeah, no, definitely. But to put it in perspective, this places it around the same budget as Return of the Jedi.
Wow.
The film would premiere in West Germany on March 5th, 1982. And with that, it's time for us to get our tickets, grab some popcorn, and head to our seats. Kristen, take us through the plot.
All right. So, I mean, as we've kind of talked about, a lot of what we're going to talk about is already sort of been discussed because a lot of this comes from history. But so we have an opening scene where we're introduced to an Irishman named Brian Sweeney Fitzgerald, but he is known to the locals as Fitzcarraldo with an O at the end. He is a lover of opera. He's a great fan of the internationally renowned Italian tenor Enrico Caruso. And so he and his partner Molly, they are arriving to this opera. And Molly, she's this person who she doesn't really care about being late to the show. She doesn't see a point in rushing, but she is supportive of her partner's dreams and interests in the opera. And we do see a snippet of the opera itself from the point of view of an audience member. So we kind of get an idea of what this man is so focused on. He's hyper-focused on this beautiful opera. And he does eventually get in, but he is stopped by security at first. They won't let them through since they came late. And they beg to be let in. Fitzcarraldo tells the man about his dreams of building an opera house in Iquitos with Caruso as the singer, and the security guard sympathizes with his love for the opera, and so he lets them in to kind of hang out near the back. And during the performance, while they're watching it, Caruso points right at Fitzcarraldo during the performance, and this is a profound moment for him. You can really see it in his eyes that he is just like starstruck. And it's important to note that like he has these big dreams, but Fitzcarraldo does not have the money to make them happen. He's been trying and failing to make money to bring opera to Iquitos through various other means, including an ambitious attempt to construct a trans-Andean railway, but nothing seems to quite stick, even though he really wants it to.
Yeah, I thought that his his reaction, if he really was pointed at
Mm-hmm.
his reaction and his, is it his wife or no, his girlfriend? Is it wife or girlfriend?
I think they're just dating. I think they're just like it's his partner.
Okay, yeah, that wasn't really clear. Claudia, I'm sorry, Molly. I almost thought it like it was kind of funny how they believed it. It was kind of childish, like that. Oh, he pointed at me. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was completely enthralled and inspired by it, but it was bizarre. And then after watching the whole movie, it's almost even more bizarre to me, to tell you the truth.
I think that like that idea of like him thinking that he's pointing at that, I feel like anybody who's been to a concert or anything that they're really pumped about, you are convinced that they are looking directly at you. So like I think that was like a universal experience of being like, they pointed at me. But yeah, you can just really see the passion this guy has for the opera. Like it's in his eyes in the performance of like Klaus Kinski. He really sells it that he loves opera with all his heart.
Yeah, and there's a passion. As Rob said, there's also like a childlike naivete about his passion.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also, as Rob talked about, there's just in everything Klaus does, there also is this sinister undertone that you can't escape. And it's in many ways magnetic to watch, but you wonder how the performance could be different with someone else because, as he is pulling Molly along, ranting and raving, you're fascinated, you're wanting to watch it, but you're wondering why anyone else would want to be around this or put up with it.
And you're also aware, because he makes the statement, that they've traveled, was it 12 or 1,500 miles up the Amazon?
Yeah. For like 2 days. Like
Right.
his hands are all bandaged because the motor went out. And so he'd been rowing, all the way to get here.
Right, exactly. So again, like he's got that disheveled look. He's got the bedhead. He looks nuts. He looks
insane.
a white, he's got a white suit on that's been,
soiled by this travel. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, it's just wild. And so it is captivating, but it kind of, to me, again, didn't match. Not that it didn't match, but it was just wild to me that, it was a little bizarre. Like now you see this guy completely enthralled by being pointed at.
Yeah. Well, again, there's a kind of obsession, there's a version of this performance where that obsession has an openness and a warmth to it that brings you in.
Right.
This is, you're fascinated, you want to keep watching, but again, like I said, for me at least, it was, and this is throughout the movie, it's like, why is this is a nut job off the street,
Right.
this is this is a dangerous man.
Totally.
It makes me wonder why anyone's like following what he wants to do.
Exactly, and that becomes a reoccurring thing as the plot escalates throughout the film of why anyone is putting up with him.
Well, he arrives with the character Molly. Molly is played by Claudia Cardinale, an Italian beauty queen and actress. She did a ton of Italian and French films prior to this, and prior to Fitzcarraldo. She did a number of Hollywood films in the 1960s, Pink Panther, The Professionals, Don't Make Waves, I think it's Waves with Tony Curtis, Once Upon a Time in the West, Sergio Leone Western, with Henry Fonda and Charles Bronson.
Oh, and
And then
Jason
after being,
Robards, so
yes,
that would have
yes,
been interesting, if Robart, to unfortunately some of the stuff that remains isn't her stuff with him, but that would have been a reuniting of them because they've been in that together.
exactly. Well, I think she was a little disappointed in the U.S. In the Hollywood film career, so she did
Yeah.
return back to Europe and continue with a number of films in Europe and a very, very successful career.
Yeah, I like that when I was looking up stuff about her that she said she didn't want to become a cliche. Just cracks me up. Like,
No, because she was one of the the documentary Herzog made about his relationship with Kinski is called My Best Fiend. um, and she is featured in that, and she, based on her shoot, and this is why I say the shooting in Iquitos went smoothly. And, she is one of two women. The other is the female co-lead from Vychek, who said they had nothing but great experiences with him, in filming, that they had no issues. He was very pleasant and gentle with them.
Was that a quote from the Italian beauty queen?
Well, I mean that was Claudia's experience with Kinski was, she didn't see that she didn't see the outbursts and the rage and the difficulties.
Yeah.
and I'm sure it helped that they like in those scenes where he does have to act out a bit, she's not involved in those as much, so that I think helps.
Yeah. So
Conveniently sheltered. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so talking about Iquitos, back in the town, once after the opera, they come back to Iquitos, and we see this dichotomy immediately between the local townsfolk and the main couple, because, I mean, you're watching them walk through town, they're donned in all white, and much of the stuff around them is run down, a little bit dirty, and they get to this beautiful-looking house that is more like a brothel house hybrid, and it's here that Molly operates a brothel / housemaid thing. She kind of is giving them something else to do besides just sex work, basically. And then it's also, while we're home, we see a moment where Fitzcarraldo, he really loves to play his opera records, and his only audience in the moment, the only interest in the town, is a bunch of local kids and a pig. And he takes them up to this, the barn type thing. It's some area where he plays it for them, and they're all transfixed. And we also see a brief scene of his ice production business. That's another one of his side hustles he's trying to do to make money. And he has pretty high hopes for it. But then he gets his dreams crushed pretty quickly when they're all playing cards at a local area. And this local rubber baron named Don Aquilino sees no future for ice in the city. And so Fitzcarraldo, it's like 1 second he's like, yeah, I'm feeling like things are going to go really well. And then you cut to him being like, yeah, there's no hope for ice in the city. So you kind of have this moment where you realize, okay, he needs something. He needs some kind of funding if he ever wants to achieve his dream. So other important things I will understand about the story, the Peruvian government, they had parceled up areas in the Amazon basin known to contain rubber trees, and the best parcels have pretty much been leased to private companies for exploitation all around in this area. And pretty much all the money is with the barons, like Don Aquilino and other ones like him. And so after that, there's this scene with Fitzcarraldo repeatedly ringing the church bell, saying that the church is closed until he gets his opera house. And this is a stunt that he is arrested for 2 days, and he's basically put in a cell to cool off.
Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned going to the house, and the house is to Molly's house, and that she runs a brothel. That actually kind of went past me. I mean, I think I was kind of aware, but you don't see any exploitation. You don't see any naked women or half naked women. Like, you don't see that, but you're somewhat aware of it, right? And you're still trying to, maybe, do I trust Fitzcarraldo? Am I so? Yeah. There's times when he seems to appreciate and adore little children, and you're not sure whether that's creepy or is it okay. It's a little. Did you guys get that?
Yeah, some of that is just I think Klaus's energy. And I think so. the scene, we're at the part we have the clips from Robards and Jagger from. Like,
Mhm.
you have Robards and Jagger together making the ice for the kids and handing it out. You have Robards and Jagger ringing the bell. You have another clip of Jagger doing a little monologue that I think was just cut. Robards, and like there isn't much talking in the scene with the ice. You know, the other scene the other clip kind of showcases Jagger. So the scene with the bell is the only time you really get to get a sense of what Robards' performance as Fitzcarraldo would have been like. And that's where I'm talking about. He still has the intensity and the passion, but there's a warmth and joy that is magnetic about it that you don't have with Kinski. You know, they're both magnetic performances. They're both intense performances, but you know, one is making you want to watch almost for negative reasons, and
Right.
one you're wanting to follow. You know, you want him. You know, Robards, I get the sense, you know, again, this is just a very short clip of it, you know, that you would want to be seeing him, wanting to see him succeed. You would understand a bit more about why people were willing to follow him on these, you know, quixotic adventures.
Well,
Yeah.
regardless
Rob.
of which actor regardless of which actor played the role in you know of the bell ringing, right? When Kinski does it, like for me, I wasn't sure how much of that was just entitlement, you know, thinking he can get away with this kind of crap, or how much of it was we're about to see this guy do a whole bunch of insane things in this movie.
Yeah, it was giving very unhinged and kind of bratty in a way to
Mhm.
be like,
Exactly.
I'm just going to hold this church bell hostage until I get what I want. And it's like, it's silly. I didn't take it totally seriously. I was kind
Yeah.
of like, who is this guy?
Well, but there's a reading, again, this is just me extrapolating what I see in the finished movie and this little bit with Robards. I could see the scene reading differently with Robards just because there it could be he is standing like the people here in the current version, especially with Kinski, it feels like Kinski is saying the people want um, opera in Iquitos, but that's really just him wanting opera in Iquitos. The
Correct.
people don't really care.
At all.
With Robards in the role, I could see it being true that the people want, because he has infected them with his dream, because he is open and, you know, caring, and, you know, that it's more believable that people would believe in his dream. And so, you know, he is standing up to the plutocrats, you know, who are saying, no, we don't, you know, we're not going to invest in that. You know, we've taken all the money and resources for ourselves, but we're not going to give it back to the people in any way. So I could see that coming across better or differently with Robards. I'm not sure that was the intention, but I could see it potentially working better.
So Fitzcarraldo continues to try to talk to Don Inquilino into investing in the opera house. He brings a phonograph to a party to show off the appeal of the art, but he's kicked out, but not before he tells the host that he will outperform him in every way in life. He will get his opera. So Don Inquilino, they have this relationship where Fitzcarraldo's constantly coming to him, trying to get advice, trying to find a way to get his opera house, because he knows that this is a man who has money, who has power within this area. And so there's this moment where Fitzcarraldo gets to see how Don Inquilino does his rubber production process. He shows him also a map, kind of showing like, here's all of the places that I've got rubber, other people have this rubber production. And while looking at the map, there is this one remaining unclaimed parcel in the area that is a major tributary of the Amazon on the Ucayali River. It's cut off from the Amazon and access to Atlantic ports pretty much. It's not a very good section, and because it basically is this lengthy area right by the rapids. And Inquilino basically says there's no rubber or gold, and nobody even wants to touch it. It's just an inconvenient area. But Fitzcarraldo he notices that the Pachatea River, another Amazon tributary, comes within several hundred meters of the Ucayali upstream of this area. And so Pachatea is largely unexplored because of the hostile indigenous people who live on its banks. So it's pretty much unexploited for that reason. But he decides he's going to lease this inaccessible parcel from the government in hopes of harvesting rubber from the area and fund his opera dream that way. He's thinking that it's just going to be some extra work for the rubber, and he's the only one willing to put in the work. He's like, basically like, all these other people are saying it's too inconvenient. Well, not for me. I'm going to go and do it. And so he has this stipulation when he does purchase this parcel that he has to find something valuable in it within 9 months. And so he basically has to take valuable steps to exploit this region. It's so interesting the way they're calling it exploitation too. Like, it's just like, I'm buying this to exploit it, which is like, yes, it's correct. Like, that's kind of what you do. But just the word exploit has such a negative connotation, and it's so interesting the way it's used in this film.
Yeah.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, that's a historical use from the time period the movie is set in, where you would say, like, you know, it's also that kind of legal language of, you know, like the Homestead Act, you know, like when we were opening up the West, you had to, you know, you could get this land for dirt cheap if you were white. You know, it didn't count for other people, but, you know, you could get this land for dirt cheap, but you had to be seen exploiting and improving it. And that's the same thing here.
Well, you know, that term is definitely, you know, a business term as well, right? The exploitation of it. And Don Aquilino, yeah, he is played by actor Jose Logoy, and he plays a really good, you know, a fat cat who's comfortable in his situation. He's making tons of money. You know, he's a poker player. You see a scene like that, you just see he's on his, I don't know. He's got good business. He's doing well. The actor pretty much is really, really known for this film, but he's been in a number of other films as well. He's a Brazilian actor, did a ton of art house cinema. Other films that you might be aware of that you've seen him in is Blame It on Rio. That's the one with Michael Caine. And
Demi Moore, very young
right,
Demi Moore.
Exactly. In 1985's Kiss of the Spider Woman. And also Moon Over Parador is one that you might also remember.
Oh yeah, no, that's Richard Dreyfuss and Raul Julia. It's on sale. Yeah. Like as we're recording this, it's on sale on Apple. I actually might end up picking up a copy for it's like $5.
Yeah,
comedy, I believe. I think I've seen that one.
Yeah, no, it's similar plot to the movie Dave. Except instead of in Dave, it's an American president. They need the double for in Moon Over Parador, it's a dictator of a Latin American country.
Of a made-up Latin American.
Yeah.
There is no Parador for this.
Right.
Yeah. And so they bring in Richard Dreyfuss, and it also has similarities to a Robert Heinlein book called Double Agent to the Stars.
Don Aquilino, he's an interesting character in this because you can tell he's just got like a slimy vibe about him, and that he's a baron. You know, the word baron is a good terminology for it, even though it's accurate, but also just that feeling of like, I'm better than you kind of vibe. And you can really see the class difference in these kind of scenes, especially showing the rubber making, because he's just like talking it up as these great things, and you just see these locals just being worked to the bone basically to do this thing. And it is intense when he showed like actually what it took to make the rubber and everything. That was an interesting scene.
Well, and again, like blurring the line. Oh, sorry, Rob, go.
I think we're about to make similar points, Adam, because like you know, blurring, you were saying blurring the lines, and I was about to say, you know, you see this mixture of colonialism, entitlement, all these factors coming together, and you're sort of not unsure of what position you should be taking right now. Because
like it's presenting the stuff, but it's not really presenting it with commentary. So that's one thing is like that's where I was talking about. Like it can, because he doesn't often present, and Fitzcarrald, the hero of the movie, isn't necessarily fighting against these systems. If anything, he's trying to benefit from them. So you're questioning whether, and he's your hero. So are you endorsing these values? Are you not? Are you speaking against them? That could be one thing. But what I was actually starting to say was it's also blurring the lines between reality and fiction again, because to show you how rubber is made, they are really having rubber made. To show Don Aquilino is a fat cat rubber baron he is being carried around in a litter chair, a big chair with natives dressed in loincloths. The way to depict this is by having actual natives in actual loincloths carry around the actual European actor in a litter chair.
The brilliance of Kinski here too is in playing this role is, you mentioned when he plays the phonogram, the entire room is watching him, not just because he's playing it, but like you see them talking to each other, kind of like, hey, look at this dude, like what the hell is he? Right? You start and it's very effective because you start thinking, at times, Kinski knows how powerful and how attention grabbing he is, and at other times it feels like maybe he's just unaware because he's looking for this approval at times when people are actually, I think, kind of making fun of him.
Yeah,
it's
you
really
get secondhand embarrassment from it a little bit.
Yes, sorry, Kristen, for cutting you off.
Oh, that's okay. No, so what I was kind of getting at with the class difference and everything, it's like you can say that you are showing this inaccuracy to what it's like, or that it's showing exploitation, but it's kind of hard because if you aren't actually saying anything about the exploitation and just showing it, people can gauge what you're trying to say from it, but it doesn't, people can interpret it either as you saying that it's not a good thing, or people can just take it as, oh, this is standard. I am going to perpetuate this stereotype because I've seen it in movies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So because it isn't clear in giving that sort of commentary, it's kind of in this gray area where he's not saying anything and still showing it. So it's like he may not be intending to, but he is indeed perpetuating those stereotypes.
Well, and that also gets into that gray area of how do you depict things on film, not just like for commentary, but, like I was talking about the blurred lines between the way they depict things is by actually doing the thing they're depicting. And so that gets into, and when do you start crossing a line doing that? And we'll have more of this discussion in part 2, I'm sure, but, it's how do you ethically depict things that, especially when they are unethical. So like if you needed to portray someone who was on an unhealthy, deathly amount of steroids, how do you do that without putting someone on an unhealthy, deathly amount of steroids? How do you portray someone who was near death from anorexia without, putting them into that close to that medical state? And how do you do that safely, for everyone involved? It's those kind of, and those are just 2 extreme examples, and there are many others, we could all think of, but it's, again, how do you do this without, how do you show the exploitation without actually being an exploiter yourself? And, did Herzog cross the line?
And this is before a lot of committees and things help to regulate those sorts of things and to have a person on set making sure things like this aren't happening. But I'm sure this is before all of that too. So it's
not just before all of that. Even then, it might not get caught up because that's part of a specific system. Like you have to basically be inside the studio system working with SAG. If you are not working, if you're working with non-union actors, this is in this is in Peru. So, that's where, it would be entirely up to you whether you held yourself to those ethical standards or not, because they don't have oversight over you. So, especially as this is self-financed, so it's not like he also then would have studio protocols or something guiding it as well. But yeah, no, it's all, that's part of what makes this movie fascinating to watch and fascinating to talk about. As we're getting wrapped up here from our conversation before we get to the outro, I just remembered something from as we were starting to go through the plot I really wanted to talk about, and we kind of got off on other things. So in addition to Caruso, who was an actual historical famous opera singer, they also depict Sarah Bernhardt, who is one of the most famous 19th century actresses out of France that there has ever been. Her Wikipedia page is longer than like Herzog's and the movie and Fitzcarraldo the movie combined. Just incredibly famous. But in this movie, they depict her as they have her played by a male actor, insulting her beauty. Admittedly, by the time period this movie is portraying, she would have been up there in age, but still. And then also insulting her abilities in general, acting like she couldn't sing to save her life and stuff like that. And I could not find any reason whatsoever for this. I don't know if this is a genuine opinion of Herzog's, if this is an opinion that is widely held. I have no clue where this came from. Just out there, Sarah Bernhardt being dead for years and years, and just suddenly catching strays for no reason.
See, I didn't even remember that part, but I'm sure if I went back, I would probably recognize it. It's like fuzzy in my mind because I did watch it a little bit ago, but man.
Yeah, I thought they were referencing Sandra Bernhardt. I didn't,
the actress who was on like Roseanne and in Hudson Hawk. Well, because the Bernhardt, like Sandra Bernhardt, that actress is not related to them, but the Bernhardt family would go on to continue, sort of like the Barrymores here in the U.S., continued to be a very big part of entertainment for a while. The Bernhardt name, I'm pretty sure, goes on for a while, and there are a number of other Bernhardts who are also, and so then I do tend to get them confused, and I've had that same feeling at times. But no, that Sandra Bernhardt, as far as I am aware, is not related to the other ones. But yeah. So that was one of those. I literally, especially on my second watch through, really noticed that and spent a good portion of time Googling, trying to figure out like just where that came from. And so Werner, if you're listening, tell us why you want to, why you hate Sarah Bernhardt so much, because I know he is. And he doesn't hate me doing the accent, not nearly as much as Kristen does, at least.
No, I think that he's coming for you because you're trying to imitate him now. If he's listening, he's angry.
That is where we are going to have to leave things for today. Tune into part 2 to find out if they are able to figure out a way to get upriver, if they can get that boat up the incline, and most importantly, if the people of Iquitos ever get to hear Caruso. Thanks so much to my co-host Rob and Kristen. Thanks so much to our editor Javi and the entire Savage Content team. Thanks so much to our sponsor Jazzology with Willard Jenkins. And most importantly, thanks to all of you for listening. Please give us a review, 5 stars, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe, like, ring the bell, leave a comment, all the good YouTube things. I've been your host, Adam, and we'll see you next time on the Savage Movie Night Podcast.